Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first public program of the Atomic Testing Museum. We're delighted to have you all here today. You will hear much more about our featured first panel here in just a minute. I want to just welcome you all to the first official activity of the NTS Historical Foundation in the brand new Frank H. Rogers Science and Technology Building, which we dedicated last night. I'm delighted to be the first speaker in what I think is going to be another historic day, and which is going to be the beginning of what we hope is a continuing series of public education activities in this new facility. Yesterday's featured speaker at the grand opening, retired four-star General John Gordon, and now the advisor to the President of the United States for Homeland Security, talked about the history of the cooperation of science, academia, and business. He talked about the beginnings of the nuclear program in the Manhattan Engineering District in 1942. And he discussed the fact that that model, which served this nation so well for over 50 years, still exists today. In 1942, there were scientists like Oppenheimer and Teller. There was the academic involvement of the University of Chicago and the University of California. There was the Manhattan Engineering District, and there were DuPont, Union Carbide, and Bell Labs. Today, in this facility, we have much of the same model. We have the three national laboratories, Livermore, Los Alamos, and Sandia. We have the academic presence of the University of California, the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, and most importantly, the Desert Research Institute. We have the government interests represented by NNSA and business by Bechtel, represented by Bechtel, Lockheed Martin, and Wackenhut as an example. So the point that I made and the point that General Gordon made is, isn't it amazing that the very same model that worked in 1942 works today? And isn't it great that that model made the United States of America both the international leader it is today, but a free nation? Today's program will give us a very unique view of how that happened and what could be more appropriate for the first program of a Cold War museum than to have the sons of two of the original Cold Warriors here as first on the program. Today's a great day, a great lead-in to the opening of the museum itself and to the permanent exhibits in mid-2004. But for a moment, I'd like to focus now on DRI. DRI is not only the preeminent research arm of the University and Community College System of Nevada, but it is on its own merit an internationally recognized authority in matter of air quality and water quality. The DRI has been a part of the NTS for over 40 years, and so the cooperation between the DRI and the government is no surprise. DRI has been an integral part of the planning and implementation of the vision that resulted in this facility since its beginning. When you have a vision like that, and you have an institution like DRI, often that institution is only a manifestation of the person who runs it. Steve Wells is not only president of DRI, but he is on his own, a scientist with international credentials. Under his leadership, DRI has prospered, and under his leadership, we have put together this remarkable coalition that mirrors the beginning of the Manhattan Engineering District. Please welcome to the podium the president of DRI, Dr. Stephen Wells.
Thank you, Troy, and welcome, distinguished guests. It's truly an honor to see all of you on a campus that has typically been somewhat quiet, doing our own research and not having a public venue. And we're honored to be partners with the Nevada Test Site Historic Foundation, with the National Nuclear Security Agency and their activities that are going on here, and have a public venue that allows you to come in and not only see the history, remember the past and its importance for protecting this nation, but also see what we do as an institution in terms of our research for the future sustainability of Nevada, the U.S., and the world. Yesterday, we dedicated this building in honor of Frank H. Rogers, who was the first chief operating officer at the Nevada test site and a leading member of the community. And we heard great words from his son, Jim Rogers, who made this building possible through a very generous gift, and also from Senator Harry Reid, a tape that he had discussing Frank's life and what he played in terms of a prominent role in the community. The building is home to the Frank H. Rogers Center for Environmental Remediation and Monitoring, where DRI strives to maintain the balance between national security and sustainable environments as a top priority. So the center is a very fitting tribute to an enduring legacy of Frank Rogers and the people he represents who work very diligently at the NTS. I hope you get a chance to visit the changing gallery here that highlights the Francis Gary Powers exhibit that you can see there. Also a chance to go through what the museum will look like when it opens in a few months and learn the history of this state and of this nation. I welcome you all and thank you for this opportunity and look forward to this remarkable event we're about to see. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve. Before I introduce Art Wolf, I want to publicly thank the organizations that helped us put this together today, the DynCorp Technical Services Company, Bechtel, Nevada, Nevada Humanities, KLVX Channel 10, BWXT, and Kellogg Brown and Root. Their support made today possible. Let's thank them all. As you have heard, perhaps more than you ever wanted to hear, this whole idea began with a bunch of people from the test site sitting together and realizing we had to preserve a piece of history, but we had no idea how to do it. We got started, and fortunately, almost 8 months ago, we brought a real professional onto the scene. Art Wolf has been the director of the Atomic Testing Museum in Las Vegas since February 2003. He was trained as an anthropologist in Nebraska and Arizona. His 30-year career has included curatorial and leadership roles at many different museums, the Millicent Rogers Museum, the Museum of the Rockies, the High Desert Museum, and he was also curator of the Nevada State Museum and Historical Society. So when he came to us here in Las Vegas, he really was coming back to a place where he'd been and knew people, and he's been a great addition to our staff, and he's been a great addition to this initiative, and without him, we could have not have possibly gotten to the point we got to yesterday. So please welcome to the podium the director of the Atomic Testing Museum, Art Wolf.
Before we get the program going, we keep saying this, I'd like to make some thanks to our wonderful staff, and it's very easy to do very quickly because there aren't very many of us right now. We're just starting. I'd like to thank Joyce Rogers, who's in the back of the room there, who's my assistant. Please give her a hand. Maggie Smith is our retail manager and also our volunteer coordinator, and all the wonderful volunteers you see around today have been given their jobs and tasked by Maggie. So let's give Maggie a hand. Now, we've had wonderful corporate support and federal appropriations for our project, but we're just starting in to get to know all of our neighbors in Las Vegas. And the person helping us to do that is Peggy Bostian, who's right over there. And finally, we have a core group of about 25, sometimes as many as 40 volunteers who are the heart and soul of the Test Site Foundation, who have kept it going through lean times and times that are hopefully getting a little fatter. And you'll see them around with their badges on, and would you thank them for volunteering? As Troy said, what better way to kick this off than with a conversation between the sons of two cold warriors, and to bring the world to Las Vegas to help put the Nevada test site into the context of the Cold War. We're very fortunate today, and I'll introduce myself just briefly. On your right, Francis Gary Powers Jr. On your left, Sergei Krushchev. And as our moderator today, Ambassador William H. Courtney. Now, we're very happy to have Bill here today to do this because, as you'll see in a moment, he's eminently qualified. And we're also glad to thank him again because he is indeed the Director of National Security Programs for Computer Sciences Corporation, which is the parent company of DynCorp Technical Services. So please thank them again for their general sponsorship. Bill has been with DynCorp and then CSC after retiring from the U.S. Department of State. He was a career State Department man, Special Assistant to the President, Senior Director of the National Security Council, Staff for Russia, Ukraine, and Eurasia, Ambassador to Georgia, Ambassador to Kazakhstan, and as Ambassador, he co-chaired the U.S. side in early talks with the USSR and then Russia on the safety, security, and dismantlement of nuclear weapons. Again, a hand for our panel, and hang on to your seats for a great conversation.
All right, thank you very much. I think we're going to find that this is one of the most fascinating discussions that any of us will hear, and certainly one of the most historic to have two.
Check your other way.
You have to be the green light.
Just keep it that way. There you go.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. You'll find this to be one of the most fascinating discussions that you'll ever hear today, I think, to have these two prominent persons, individually prominent in their own right, and the sons of two great figures from the Cold War. What I'd like to do just at the beginning is put this in a little context by reminding us a little bit about some of the historical events of that time. Many of us in the room are old enough to remember them firsthand, but our children might not be. So I thought I would just run through a little of this quickly, and then we'll go right to our discussion. We may have a kind of a three-way discussion here for 20 or 30 minutes, and then we'll have a microphone and go right to the audience for the last 45 minutes, and we'd love to hear your questions and your commentaries, and be interested if you share some of your experiences as well. This day, 46 years ago, was historic. The Soviet Union launched the first of its Sputnik satellites. Sputnik launches sent shockwaves, causing many Americans to believe that our country might be behind in technology and military power. The Sputnik launches were also a high point in the career of Nikita Khrushchev. Khrushchev was born in 1894, the son of a poor peasant and coal miner. He became an early Bolshevik revolutionary, and by 1939, he was a member of Stalin's Politburo, the elite leadership of the Communist Party. Shortly after Stalin died in 1953, Khrushchev became the new head of the party. He eased pervasive fear and released several 100,000 political prisoners in short order. In 1956, Khrushchev took another bold step, criticizing Stalin for having committed mass murders. This denunciation led to bloody uprisings in Eastern Europe, and a few months later, then Khrushchev directed an armed invasion of Hungary to put down a popular rebellion. Later, Khrushchev provoked crises in Berlin and Cuba. In October 1962, America confirmed that the USSR was secretly installing nuclear missiles in Cuba. President Kennedy imposed a naval quarantine around that island nation. Khrushchev withdrew the missiles from Cuba, and the United States withdrew missiles from Turkey. Partly because of the scare of the Cuban Missile Crisis, Washington and Moscow in 1963 signed their first important arms control agreement, the Limited Test Ban Treaty. This treaty allowed only underground nuclear explosions, but banned atmospheric testing. Thus began a series of arms control negotiations and treaties that has persisted for 4 decades. Nikita Khrushchev adopted a policy of peaceful coexistence. This was a break from the Stalin era. Peaceful coexistence meant that war with the West was not inevitable. This softening led to a rupture between the Soviet Union and China in 1959. In retrospect, Khrushchev's thaw at home and his efforts to ease tensions with the West had a lasting impact. They helped create a constituency that, a quarter of a century later, supported Mikhail Gorbachev's reforms, and then those helped undermine the Soviet Union, and it was destroyed. Today, some of the younger among us think of U2 as a popular rock group from Ireland. For others, it represented a dramatic moment in the Cold War. Secrecy was an obsession in the USSR and in the Russian Empire before it. Rulers tried to hide backwardness and weakness from the West. And in the Russian Empire, you may recall that officials tried to hide some of this backwardness from their own leaders. And so in the era of Catherine the Great, Potemkin villages were created when she traveled around the country. Secrecy often led the West in the Cold War to be surprised by new developments in the USSR. The first Soviet tests of an atomic weapon and a hydrogen or nuclear weapon came as a surprise. Likewise, the West feared a bomber gap in the mid-50s and a missile gap 5 years later. Indeed, the missile gap became a prominent feature of the electoral campaign between President Kennedy and between John Kennedy and Richard Nixon. In a feat of extraordinary ingenuity, the United States developed the high-flying, long-range U-2 spy aircraft to roll back some of this secrecy and help lead to the creation of new information that could provide greater stability. Indeed, U-2 flights provided evidence that no missile gap existed in the USSR's favor. This information eased anxieties and diminished risks of overreaction. Later, U-2 flights in 1962 confirmed that the Soviet Union was installing ballistic missiles in Cuba. Francis Gary Powers was one of the brave pilots of the U-2. He completed over 24 risky missions. In May 1960, the Soviet Union shot down his aircraft. At first, President Eisenhower denied that the airplane was a spy aircraft. Nikita Khrushchev arranged for the remnants of the U-2 to be shown on television, and then President Eisenhower admitted that the U.S. had been conducting flights over the Soviet Union for 4 years. Powers was put on public trial and later traded for a Soviet spy in America. Powers was on a mission to photograph secret Soviet nuclear installations when he was shot down. We are indeed honored to have our 2 guests today, and let me just introduce both of them by way of a short description about something of what they have been doing. Since 1991, Dr. Khrushchev has been a scholar at the Thomas Watson Institute for International Studies at Brown University. From 1968 to 1991, He served at the Control Computer Institute in Moscow. From 1958 to 1968, he was an engineer and then deputy section head in charge of guidance systems for missile design, missile and space design. Dr. Khrushchev has his Soviet doctoral degree from the Ukrainian Academy of Sciences, a PhD from the Moscow Technical University, and a master's with distinction from the Moscow Electric Power Institute. In the Soviet Union, he received the Lenin Prize for his research, the Prize of the Council of Ministers of the USSR, and the title Hero of Socialist Labor. He is a regular commentator for the American media and the author of more than 250 books and articles on engineering, computer science, history, and the economy. He is also the author of Khrushchev on Khrushchev, published in 1990, Nikita Khrushchev, Crisis and Missiles, published in 1994, The Political Economy of Russian Fragmentation, published in 1993, Three Circles of Russian Market Reforms, published in 1995, and Nikita Khrushchev and the Creation of a Superpower, published in 2000. Let us welcome Dr. Sergei Krushchev. With his extensive background in electric power, he's agreed to talk with those who would be interested about electric power blackouts after this session.
Yeah, I know why it happened. It will happen in the future too, here.
Francis Gary Powers, Jr. was born in June 1965 in Burbank, California, and he is the son of Francis Gary and Claudia Sue Powers. Gary holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in philosophy from California State University in Los Angeles and a master's degree in public administration from George Mason University in Virginia. As president of the Vienna-Tysons, Virginia Regional Chamber of Commerce, Gary is dedicated to strengthening the business and professional community in Vienna and the surrounding area. In 1996, Gary founded the Cold War Museum and Memorial to honor Cold War veterans and preserve Cold War history. Currently, a mobile exhibit travels internationally that displays historical artifacts associated with the U-2 incident of May 1960. The traveling exhibit promotes interest in the creation of a permanent Cold War museum that will exhibit artifacts and memorabilia associated with various Cold War events from the end of World War II to the collapse of the Soviet Union. In conjunction with the museum, a Cold War memorial will honor the men and women who worked toward the preservation of democracy during the Cold War from 1945 to 1991. Let's welcome Francis Gary Powers, Jr. Let me begin, Dr. Khrushchev, Sergei, with you. Nikita Khrushchev is seen now, looking backwards, as a person who, with the thaw in the 1960s, really did begin loosening the Soviet system. But others would say Nikita Khrushchev was complicit in Stalin's crimes. How do you see the historical balance here in your father's activities?
If we talk about my father, we cannot just take from his life this period, another period. He started as, how to say, he became, say it this way, the active worker involved in trade union movement before the revolution. He was not the member of the Communist Party, because we're now thinking about the Communist Party as something very substantial in the pre-revolutionary Russia, but all the membership in the 150 million Russians at that time, maybe 3, 4, 5,000. And after that, he fought in the Civil War and returned to his mine in the Ukraine and worked there, going from one step to the another, like everywhere, as an active person. But he never thought that he will be or want to be a politician. He wanted to be an engineer. But because he born in the remote area, in the village, where they have only 2 grades in the school nearby church, it was all his education. And he, we can say, not graduated maybe, but studied what you have to study in school when he was a grown-up person after the revolution. And he wanted to complete his education. So he asked this Ukrainian leadership to allow him to go to study in the Moscow Industrial Academy. It was such institution in Moscow that was created for the newborn Soviet industrial managers who had no real education. And when he joined this, it was the fighting between Stalin and other leaders from the leadership. Trotsky was out of power at that time, was exiled, but it was many others. And when we talk, there was no democracy at that time. I think maybe at that time was a so-called communist democratic society, because it was different groups that just competed with each other. And my father joined Stalin, supporting Stalin, looking as he is more practical than any others. When we're talking about that period of the Russian history, it is easiest way to say that it was a wrong decision because Stalin was a bad man. That is true. But if we look closer to that events, maybe all others were worse. Difficult to say, because some of them was not pragmatic people, don't know how to manage. All of them have created the same cruelties. I would not say the revolution's crime is killing at any others. So he supported Stalin, and Stalin promoted him, the active person, until he will become the party leader of the Moscow and Moscow region. And we have to understand that party leader in the Soviet, in the centralized society, not the party like here. The party leader in Moscow is like governor. He is responsible for everything. It's just another name. And after the purges, so at the time of the purges, he started to think that Stalin is behaving wrong, that all these cruelties, execution, that again the interest of the country, again the law, even that respecting the law is a very controversial thing in the Russia and Soviet Union. And we know that from 1938, he had doubt, say this polite word, in what the Stalin doing, but it was too late. Because in the Stalin's time, if you will not support Stalin, I will not say oppose Stalin, not support Stalin, then you will be on the other side that means if it will my father level, you will be executed. If it's some lower level, you will be sent somewhere the concentration camp. Then, of course, his concern about Stalin became much bigger during the war, because Stalin did the huge mistake that brought the Soviet Union to millions and millions in their losses during the war. But at that time, you can only praise Stalin. So he was able to introduce his own understanding about Stalin only after the Stalin death. And here the transformation of my father's views, and from the full support of Stalin to the full opposition of Stalin. That is not very unusual in the politics.
Gary, how did your father get started in the U-2 business?
Well, to understand why my father wanted to be a pilot, you have to go back to when he was about 13 years old. He took a ride in a biplane at a country fair. I think it cost 50 cents at the time. And my aunts and uncles tell me that upon landing, he said to his parents that he had left his heart up there. So right after college, graduating from Milligan College in 1950, he enlisted in the Air Force. First 2 years, he was trained as a photographer. Then he went in for his pilot training. In 1952, he got his wings, and he was flying F-84s, which was the new jets at the time, protecting American airspace here in this country. Because of his outstanding record as a fighter pilot, one of the top of his class, he was recruited in 1955, 1956 to fly the new and unique U-2 spy plane. After having gone through some psychological evaluations, some physical testing, some mental testing, he passed with flying colors and was invited to join the second group of U-2 pilots, the B Squadron, in 1956. After training here in the Nevada desert at the Area 51 test range, he flew the U-2, was stationed over in Incirlik, Turkey at Adana Air Base, and then worked there for about 4 years before being shot down on May 1st, 1960.
Okay. Did your father find that volunteering for these very risky missions was something that was difficult to decide upon, or was this something he had trained to do and was highly motivated to pursue?
At the time that my father was flying in the Air Force, you have to remember in the 50s, it was the open skies policy was being implemented or trying to be by Eisenhower. You had the card-carrying communist scare with the McCarthyism, the blacklists in Hollywood. It was a very pivotal point in history. And when my father was flying for the Air Force, his first concern was the protection of Americans at home, as his duty called upon. When he was recruited to fly for the CIA and the U-2 program, at first he was a little unsure as to what he was getting involved in, because the CIA wouldn't tell any of the pilots that were being recruited what they would be flying or what their missions would be. They briefed them that it would be flying a new and unique airplane, that you'd be doing something very patriotic for your country, and after you sign on the dotted line, we can tell you what you'd be doing. So they were given about 24 hours or so to talk it over with their family. Several pilots decided not to go into it because they didn't know what to expect or what they were going to get involved in. My father, being the pilot that he was, jumped at the opportunity to fly something new and unique, as at the same time in helping to safeguard Americans at home. So when he was recruited, he jumped at the opportunity to go and fly these planes and loved every minute of it.
Sergei, the U-2 incident was important for your father. Your father had taken the initiative after gaining power to have more summits with the West and more meetings with leaders. He came to the United States in 1959 to visit President Eisenhower, and then had invited President Eisenhower to come to the Soviet Union. But the U-2 incident intervened, and that was canceled. How did your father see the U-2 incident?
U-2 flights were the humiliation to the Soviet Union, the same if some spying flights over the United States will be humiliation to the United States. And this flight started, I don't know, incidentally, on the July 4th, 1956. And it was second time when the Soviet leadership visited the American embassy for the national holiday. And when they discussed the things, then just raised their glasses. Both sides knew that this plane is flying over the Soviet Union. And the first flight, it was scary because they did not know what is it. Maybe it is bomb, maybe they're just carrying the nuclear bomb. Especially that flight, the U-2 flew over the Moscow. He could be shot at that time, but for some incident in the air defense, they even did not track it correctly. So it was the push and the arm races, because Khrushchev asked the aircraft designers and missile designers why you cannot shoot them, and what is this plane? The designer explained that, of course, it is not a bomber. The bomber cannot, such plane flying so high, cannot carry any significant payload. It will be like dragonfly with very long wings, very fragile, but it have to be some reconnaissance missile. But anyway, it was the humiliation, and they sent the diplomatic note after that, but it was repeating these flies, and my father refused to send any diplomatic notes because he told, if we're not able to shoot this plane, so when sending this note, I am just hear how they're laughing on me in the State Department. I don't know, did you love the State Department or not? When you received it. So he told me that we have designed something that, was something, the interceptors, and then the anti-aircraft missiles, they can do it. And of course, they started this design. In 1960, they had the interceptor that can shoot the plane on this altitude, and the missile that name in the West Su-2. And after the Camp David and they meeting 59, invitation of the President Eisenhower and the decision to make the Paris summit, it was no flights. And then just before the summit, these flights resumed. And still mystery for me, why? Because we have many explanations. All these people, Mr. Bassel and others from CIA explain that we need spying and there's so many events, so many visits that we have no time really for spying. We're looking for these windows, it's a good window. It's not good explanation for me. I have my own theory that have no proof and will have no proof. I think it is the nuclear test ban, possibility of signing nuclear test ban treaty. My father was a strong supporter of banning nuclear testing from 1958. And he faced strongest opposition from the military-industrial complex, including myself. I explained him that how we can ban these tests. We have our warhead for our missile, 250,000 kiloton. No, 250 kiloton. And we have the new, much lighter, 3 times more powerful. We have to test it. And he told me, you know, I know you engineers. You can design better, lighter, durable, but we now can destroy the world. We have to stop it. So he tried to do it. And I think what I know from the president, he also wanted to do it. And from my own understanding, they cannot resolve any problems with disarmament in Paris in the May 14th. They cannot resolve the problem about Germany. But what could done, these two people, the two last leaders of the country who participated in the Second World War, who feel themselves strong enough to say to their generals, I think you don't need this, not to ask him, what do you think, what I have to sign. And I think that they can meet in Paris, my father was ready for this, and discuss the frames of the nuclear test ban treaty, and then sign it next month during the visit, presidential visit to Soviet Union. You know, the president wanted to finish with something of this. The position in Russia and a position in the United States. And here you see these U-2 flights was very good in this opposition. First flight, it was on the April 9. They flew over this nuclear facility where later father of Gary was shot. Then fly over the anti-aircraft missile test sites. But as usually, you're not prepared for such flights, no flights. So they have anti-aircraft missiles, but without warheads. They had this interceptor, but they was not trained. A radar was not working properly, so they flew back. What you have to do after that? Sit silent. Because now you know all of them are alert, like after 9/11. can imagine that will be another attack after 9/11 in 2 weeks. Nobody will make even one step. So, but they're sending the new U-2 on the May 1st. First of all, it is celebration, the holiday in Russia, and they are sending very long mission from Peshawar to Buda in Norway, flying over mostly protected areas. Then they told that CIA did not know that Soviets have technical capability to short this plane. That showed that maybe, or that CIA wasting this funding, all their history knowing nothing. Because you have to know if you have the hundreds of such missiles on the opposite side, and you tested these planes, or they did not tell it to the president. And no, and waiting. If they will shoot, then everything will blow apart. And of course, they shot this plane. First, they missed him when they flew over the Turatam, the ballistic missile test site, because one of the battery there was on the reparation, so they flew over them. But the next, he just flew directly on this anti-aircraft battery, and he was shot. So, of course, we will never know what my theory is right or wrong, because I don't think that is any documents can be found about this, but it is my logic behind this. It can be another logic, much more simple, that it is just intelligence community pressed, we need these photographs. And the president didn't pay attention to this and thinking that nothing would happen until you may go. It's also happened so many times in the political life that I know from our side that could happen too. There will be no logistic explanation for this. But it was turning point because of humiliation of my father, not so much of the flight, because he left the door open to the president. And he told to the Ambassador Thompson, American ambassador in Moscow, that of course we are just making all these propaganda articles and speeches, but I want to talk with your president before the summit in Paris, and we will find the solution. He did not use the word that I need apology, because it's difficult to push American to apologize. You meet together like we're sitting and then said, we resolve the problem. But the same day when he told this, State Department issued the statement that America will overfly Soviet territory in future if you think it will be in their national interest. That is a big insult. And then my father flew to the Paris day before the summit, and the president flew there day before the summit. As we now know from the book that was published, that the president told to his staff, maybe I will meet with Khrushchev and apologize, because would they fly over my territory, it will be the war. And the Secretary of State, Gerters, he told no. It was no meeting. He denied this meeting to Khrushchev, but Khrushchev blew up everything. At that time, he canceled the visit of the President of the United States in the Soviet Union, or of United States into the Soviet Union. It was the new turn of the Cold War. And he told that I will never support the Eisenhower part of the establishment in the future election there, because Vice President Nixon seek for his support.
Okay. Gary, your father had a poison pen, and the cover story was such that, if he were in a difficult situation, he should commit suicide and deny everything. President Eisenhower had a cover story which was to deny everything. But ultimately, your father did not insert the poison pen, and President Eisenhower reversed himself and admitted that it was a spy flight. And then your father was put on public trial. He had seen the pictures of the wreckage and so confessed, and then came back to America. What happened when he came back to America?
Well, when my father returned home after 21 months in prison, he was shocked to discover that many Americans thought he had failed the country. During his incarceration in the Soviet Union, there was a whole slew of misinformation, propaganda, conspiracy theories that were released, saying that my father had defected, that he had landed the plane intact, that he hadn't followed orders and committed suicide, or that he had spilled his guts and told the Soviets everything he knew, all of which were furthest from the truth. The U-2 pilots, early pilots, were given the option of taking a suicide device, quote unquote, with them on missions. This was part of their survival kit. It was an optional device to take, and it was to explain to them that if you're caught, you will be tortured. This is a way to alleviate the pain and suffering. Some pilots chose to take these devices with them, others did not. It was an optional device to take with them on missions, and it was an optional device to use if the pilots felt it was necessary. Once my father was shot down and captured, he contemplated using this poison pin, but decided not to see what would happen once he landed and to see what would take place. When my father was caught and captured, strip searched, they did find this device on him. At that time, realizing there's no way he could escape and that he's not being physically harmed, he told the captors, be very careful with that, it's dangerous. He did not want to have a murder conviction on top of an espionage conviction. The Soviets tested it on a dog. The dog died in 20 seconds of asphyxiation. It shut down the central nervous system. And this went very well with the cover story. The cover story that Eisenhower's administration released said that an unarmed weather research plane may have accidentally strayed across the Soviets' border after the pilot had radioed trouble with his oxygen equipment. The problem is that the cover story was designed based on the fact that had the U-2 pilot used the device, he would have died of asphyxiation going along with the cover story. However, the pilots were never told what the cover story was. They were never ordered to commit suicide. And when the cover story was released, a few days later, Khrushchev comes back up to center stage and announces very gleefully to the world that, "Ah, comrades, not only did we shoot down the plane, but we also have captured the pilot." And at that time, it was a very big embarrassment for the Eisenhower administration. You have to remember that in 1960, no one had ever heard of the CIA. It was not a weekly television show. It was not on the TV or the radio. The church committee hearings of the 70s hadn't taken place yet. It was a top secret government agency created in 1947 to safeguard Americans at home by collecting intelligence information from abroad. So when Eisenhower had to admit that we, America, had a spy agency, it was a very big embarrassment. It was also an embarrassment for the administration because the administration was caught embellishing to the American public. But now, after 43 years, Nixon, Watergate, Iran-Contra with Reagan, Johnson in Vietnam, Monica and Bill, we know that presidents do sometimes embellish. But in 1960, it was the very first time that one had been caught doing so. So it was a very big controversial issue at the time. When my father did come back home, he was extensively debriefed by the CIA, by Lockheed, by Kelly Johnson. He was put before a Senate Select Committee hearing on March 6th of 1962, and several of those transcripts are on display in the museum next door, or in the museum exhibit next door. After going through the debriefings, he was shown to be a fine young man performing well in a dangerous mission. But at the time, for the next 40 years, the American government, the CIA, the Air Force never did anything to set the record straight. The CIA was happy to have these cover stories mixed in with the truth to keep their secret programs secret, to make sure that people didn't really know the truth of what was going on. But then, 40 years after the fact, on May 1st, 2000, at an awards ceremony at Beale Air Force Base in California, my father was posthumously awarded with the POW Medal, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and a special medal from George Tenet, the Director's Medal of the CIA, for extreme valor and heroism in the line of duty. So as a family, my mother and I, my sister, were very, very honored and pleased to receive these medals on behalf of my father. As an added bonus, I was strapped into a back seat of a U-2 in a pressure suit. The Air Force took me up to 73,000 feet. I was able to see the curvature of the Earth experience what it was like to fly in a U-2 like my father had done. It brought me very, very close to my father. A trip I will never forget. That flight was once-in-a-lifetime experience for me. But more importantly, the Air Force and the CIA helped set the record straight and helped to resolve the misinformation that had been circulating for the last 40 years. So the Powers family is very grateful to the government for finally stepping forward and taking responsibility and making sure my dad was, the truth of what took place was said.
And I think it was some funny details that was not published before the perestroika and the putting the Gary's father, because it was the holiday, one of the biggest holiday in the Soviet Union, and it was even more bright holiday because it was May. And after all this winter, you have first sun, so everybody going everywhere for parties, barbecue. And it was in this time, nobody knew who is flying there in Urals. And then nearby, it was the air base where they train Warsaw Pact pilots. So when the Gary Powers just went down on his parachute, there was no KGB there. There was local people who travel on their car to the party, to the wedding. And they saw him, and they asked him, "Who are you?" He didn't speak Russian. He didn't use his speed, so he told something. He told, "You are Bulgarian." I could not understand why he can be Bulgarian. When I look in the Gary, I understand he's Bulgarian. So they started to talk about this, and then after that, he at last wrote them on the dirty windshield of this car, USA. So he told, "Oh, you're from USA, go with us." So go they to the local kolkhoz. They're going to the wedding. They didn't invite him to the wedding. They didn't offer them vodka. But they brought them, and only there this KGB came and started to search on him. So I think that with such reception, it was difficult to use the pin because they invited him to the wedding. But then he was karputed. He was brought to Moscow. And my father decided, as American president lying so much, and not only say that it was the plane was this meteorological plane, that they told that he is flying over the lake Van in Turkey. Because I think this legend was created for the Turkish base, and he flew from Pakistan, so it is no such lake here, how he came there. And so they waited, and he wanted to play longer, but it was May Day, it was May Day reception, Victory Day reception, many other. In one reception, it was the vice Swedish ambassador there, Mr. Sulman, and he just had some drink with the deputy foreign minister of the Soviet Union, and they talk about everything, and then he asked, "By the way, what is this American spy doing there?" He told, "I don't know." They interrogated him in the KGB. So it appeared that he is alive. So Sulman just rushed to his office, and he called American ambassador and said, "Guys, your spy is alive." They interrogated him. Of course, KGB reported same minute to my father that the Sulman called what told the ambassador. This deputy minister had hard week. They fired him. Then they expelled him everywhere. Next week they returned him all their position. And after that it was started this real trial and all other things.
Let's open up our discussion now to members of the audience. We have a traveling microphone that will be moving around. There are lots of topics we haven't really covered. One is, for example, Nikita Khrushchev ended up visiting Iowa rather than Nevada. Now, does that mean that he was more interested?
Invited him in Nevada.
Was he more interested in hybrid corn than in Area 51?
Yes, I think so, for sure.
He was certainly a fascinating person, and those of us who were alive at the time remember the visit. And he was, as a personality, Nikita Khrushchev came across as a very human being. Is the microphone close by? Yes. Yes.
Yes. This question is for Sergei Krushchev. I had heard that your father, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, that he was actually felt that that perhaps the United States was way overdoing or overreacting, and given the fact that the Kennedys came so close to, and tried so hard to prevent this, and yet everything came so close to a conflict. What was your father's feelings during that time?
I think that you don't planning to come to my lecture at 7 o'clock when I would talk about Cuban Missile Crisis. No, you will not come. You will? I will tell you all the story. But first, but even the better would you read my book. You have the book, so you have the answer. But I will answer you briefly. When we talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis, we have to understand that against each crisis, it is not only the calculation of the politician and military, it is the emotions. And it was not overreacted. It was natural reaction of the Americans who live in this country protected by two oceans, by all their history. No enemies, except maybe Mexico. And then it was crisis, it was Soviet missiles in Cuba. And the people became crazy. They stayed thinking that Khrushchev will launch these missiles when they became operable. Not asking why he didn't launch these missiles that operable in his own territory. What's the difference for missiles there in Cuba or there? And it was created the big problem to the both leaders, Khrushchev and President Kennedy, to resolve this crisis. Because for Khrushchev, Cuba was the same as West Berlin for the American presidents. It is a useless part of land in the middle of the hostile territory. But if you will give up this land to your enemy, your own allies will not trust you because they think next will be we. So you have to protect them, risking your life. And these missiles in Cuba was just signal to American president, don't invade Cuba, will be big trouble. But he, who grew up in Europe, where we had enemy on our borders all our history, the European or Russians, they not care that they care because they have fear about American bases in Turkey, in Europe, but they more thought about American president, will they start the war or not start the war? And for American people, not for the White House, these missiles was make them so much affected them that was ready to die but to push these missiles out. And they pressed the president also to do this. So it was overreacted. I asked Mr. Sorensen, who was the advisor to president, we had several conferences. He asked why you were so eager to push these missiles out of Cuba and invade Cuba. You did not know, CIA did not know that Soviets have 96 technical nuclear weapons there, would use them in the invasion. Forget about this. These strategic missiles, the General Taylor cannot assure that they destroy in first strike. Very easy to launch them. It is like start the car. You just turn the key, push the button. It will be not authorization of Khrushchev, not the general, not captain. This person who was there dying told, I send all the Americans to the hell. Push the button, destroy New York. And you knew that nobody will start the war. He answered me a very reasonable thing. He told, yes, we knew this, of course. But would our president accept your missiles in Cuba? He will be pushed, he will be whipped out from White House next week. He will be impeached. That's also true. So it was very dangerous and very difficult negotiation at that time. And we were lucky that we had two balanced presidents that left us alive, and we still can talk about this.
Thank you. Appreciate this opportunity. I know I speak for all of us, Mr. Powers and Mr. Khrushchev. Thank you for being here and taking part in this discussion. It's very, very amazing, to say the least. This question is directed to Mr. Khrushchev. Mr. Khrushchev, first of all, thank you. Back in the famous Moscow kitchen debate, I'm not sure what year it was in the late 50s. Your father had told...
59.
59, thank you. Appreciate that. I thought it was 58 or 59. Your father had told Vice President Nixon that one day his grandchildren would live under communism. And I'm sure you've heard this question a million times. And now here you are, the son of the former leader of the Soviet Union. You now live in the United States under capitalism. How does that make you feel today, knowing that at one time your father had told Vice President Nixon that, and then here you are living in this great country of ours? Mm-hmm. Just a thought.
No, it's, first of all, I'm feeling myself very comfortable. Secondly, it was after the kitchen debates, and my father's was basic idea that that system would win, that present better life to the people. And he at that time had no doubt that Soviet system will be more effective, and when Americans understood that Soviet system more effective, then Americans would join us. I can explain you why it's wrong, but I agree with him. It was not with the democracy, it is structural system. I can explain like a complex system, that centralized system, when it was growing to some extent less effective than the decentralized system. It was beginning with the centralization, of the Ford Motors Company, in 1946, when the young McNamara became director there. It was the beginning of this transformation. So when you see that you was wrong, you have to accept this. So I repeat that I'm comfortable, and I'm lecturing time by time together with Julia Nixon and her husband David Eisenhower, and we talked together. He told how her father fought against communism, and I told how we fought against capitalism. And then we have some champagne together.
Thank you. Mr. Khrushchev, I hope you first of all, I'm glad you joined us. Secondly, I hope very much you make a good profit on your books.
Dr. Khrushchev, I have a question. In, I think it was 1956, at the time of the Hungarian uprising, there was a period of time before the Soviet Union reestablished its authority. And I'm wondering if you can elucidate any of the thinking on the Soviet side about the possibility of this resulting in a confrontation of the West with the West. Of course, the West did nothing, but I'm just curious how much that may have played a point.
What?
In other words, was there any worry that by going back into Hungary and reestablishing authority that they were going to start a war with the United States?
You know, the world policy is sometimes a very cruel thing. Because we had there, after this de-Stalinization and many mistakes, the popular uprising inside the Soviet bloc. And of course, it was no doubt that if that people would win, they will kill their opposition the same day, and then NATO will come to our borders. It was many doubt, would we have to use force or not? My father told, maybe we'll not use the force. Because he was against using force in the other countries. He told it is Americans doing like they did in Guatemala, we mustn't be the same, because we will have we will lose many things. So they decided one day yes or no, but from other side, our allies and our people who was on our side, they was killed there, hanged there, tortured there, more and more. But it was some meeting, I don't remember, I think it was in Vienna and United Nations, where the Americans diplomats told Soviet diplomats, we will not be involved directly. That means you have to decide for your own. I think at that time it was winning-winning situation, because it was John Foster Dulles and Allen Dulles who conducted this policy. If Soviets will not use the force, Hungary will become part of NATO, or will be the... Because I don't believe in neutral Hungary. If you was on this side, then you will turn as far as you can on the opposite side. You can talk about neutrality of Switzerland, Sweden, Austria, but not them. If Soviets will not be so stupid, they will lose the propaganda war, what was really happened. So what is what there? It was the realities of the policy, how I understand this. But it was no fear on the Soviet side that Americans will be involved in their military forces, because nobody's saying these words just for nothing. And everybody know that these words are authorized on the highest level.
Let's give Sergei a rest for a moment. Gary, can you tell us about the Cold War Museum project that
Certainly.
you're leading the way in?
Thank you. The Cold War Museum was founded in 1996 to honor Cold War veterans and preserve Cold War history. It started after I had been giving lectures to high school students in 92 to 94, and 9 times out of 10, the high school students would have these blank looks on their face. I'd come in to talk about the U-2 incident. They thought I was coming in to talk about the U-2 rock band. I knew that something had to be done to preserve this history. Then in 95, I was invited to attend a conference in Bodø, Norway. That's where I met Sergei Krushchev for the first time. He was at that same conference. It was on the U-2 program and the High North. Bodø is where U-2s and other airplanes would land after successful reconnaissance missions across the Soviet Union. It's where my father would have landed on May 1st, 1960, had he not been shot down. At that conference, there was an international gathering of Cold War veterans. There was a wonderful display of Cold War airplanes, and came back home to the United States with this idea to create a permanent Cold War museum. 96, we incorporated as a 501c3. 1999, we got our CFC designation, Combined Federal Campaign, which means that federal employees and military personnel can donate directly to us. And then in 2001, we were fortunate enough to be accepted by the Smithsonian Institution as a Smithsonian affiliate museum. That means that we pay them $2,500 for that privilege per year, but in exchange, we can use artifacts from their collection in our displays, and we can use their name in our fundraising and our promotional materials. So it's a very good collaboration. Smithsonian has been very, very helpful to our museum as well as the museum here. And it's a way for them to get their thousands of items that are in storage out for public display. So it's a very good symbolic relationship. The museum information you can find, coldwar.org on the internet. And we are looking to help other museums across the country on exhibits and displays. We're looking to help build Cold War memorials around the country to honor our Cold War veterans. We'd like to have the national headquarters in the Washington, D.C. area, and then satellite chapters and partners across the states.
Great. Yes, sir. Can you wait for the microphone, please?
My question, I would like to direct my question to Mr. Khrushchev. Mr. Khrushchev, I'm born at Juresko, and from 1955 till 1961, I had the privilege of living 6 years in one of your father's jails. You, as a good son, described the accomplishments of your fathers, and I give you a lot of credit. And the way you describe your father, he sure deserves a place in heaven. But my question is more directed to his previous time, which you have not mentioned. And what did your father tell you about his involvement in the 30s when he was responsible for the mass murders of approximately 12 million Ukrainians? He earned the title to be the butcher of the Ukraine.
You know, I think that you maybe spend this time mostly here, and you did not read my book, and a book about my father that was published by Professor Tauman, because when we talk about this hunger in Ukraine, the hunger in Ukraine, by the way, it was not in Ukraine, it was hunger all over the Soviet Union. It was started when, after the effect of the new economical policy of Lenin, that reduced some market, is from the other side robbing the peasants by the very high prices for the consumer goods and all other goods. They did not supply the cities with the grain and other food. It was a big problem at that time. It was possible to resolve it in some other way. But Stalin was Stalin, and he decided to introduce kolkhozes, or to put all these peasants under the control, really that they will deliver their products for free. They stripped most of their possession from them. And all the production went down, because nobody wanted to work for nothing. It was the hunger in the Ukraine. It was not 12 millions, but it was millions there where they died. Ukrainians, and I know you're Ukrainian, just mentioning Ukraine, it was the same hunger on the Volga, it was same hunger in the Urals and the Siberia. Millions of people died. And it was the very difficult part in the history of the Soviet Union. Fortunately, my father was not involved in this at all. Here the answer for you, because in 1929, as I told you earlier, he went as a student to this industrial academy, and he was there until 1933, during this time. And after that, he was promoted in the different positions in Moscow. So he returned in Ukraine after the hunger. He left it before the hunger, returned in Ukraine after the hunger. And then it was in 1938, just after the peak of the Stalin's purges. He was in Ukraine at another hunger, the starvation, in 1946. In 1946, Stalin pressed them to give to the state everything what they produced. And it was drought there, so it was no real good crops. He wanted to have some collected more grain because he think that war is inevitable. And he also wanted to supply East European countries with their. And it was at that time, it was difficult time to my father, because it was some games there on the high echelons that I don't understand. Because he asked the Stalin's deputies who was in charge of everything and has authority to sign it for Stalin, put the Stalin Rebbe signature, that they will give him 6 million ration cards for peasants. Peasants don't have ration cards. They survive for their own. But he told, we just gave to the state everything. We will not survive. And but they sent his letter. And they told, send us the letter. We will Rebbe stamp it. Will you receive it? But they sent the letter to Stalin, who was on vacation. And Stalin told him that he's too weak and he's too supportive to the peasants, and especially to Ukrainian peasants. And then he fired him for the highest position, sending their stronger leader, whose name was Kaganovich. And my father thought that he can be arrested for this, his weakness at that time. It was involvement. So would my father be in Ukraine during that, and he has strong and high enough position? When he left Ukraine, his position was so low, nothing would be different. So at that time, your answer will be just reflected of the subject, and I would nothing to answer you in defense of my father, but now I have I'm able something to say.
I think we have time for
There.
about one more question and then a final wrap-up.
My question is directed at Mr. Powers. How was that U-2 ride in comparison to how I assume that your father described the ride to you as a child? I mean, was it a huge acceleration, like being shot out of a cannon, or was it kind of lumbering along to high altitude, or how was it?
The flight that I took on May 1st, 2000 was a wonderful flight. In a way, once you fly in an airplane, they have certain characteristics that are common amongst them. The U-2, being a jet aircraft, and with the wingspan that it has, upon takeoff, was very, very smooth. Immediately upon liftoff, it almost looked like a 45-degree angle. You were just back in your seat, almost looking like you're going straight up, though it was a 45-degree angle. When we got to altitude, we were able to see the curvature of the Earth. I was able to look out and see below me the contrails of the jet aircraft, the passenger airlines that were flying below us, 35,000 feet below us. So when you look up at the sky and you see an airplane, and it's about this big, that's what I was looking from down, and that was very unique and odd. I was taken by the silence. When you're up there, you look out the cockpit window and you see the horizon, and then you see a blue sky, and then a dark blue sky, and then pitch black above you. You're able to make out the cities below and the streets. You can kind of see the grid patterns, but you can't see any detail. Luckily for us, it was very beautiful weather. It was sunny throughout California that day. We took off from Beale, flew over San Francisco, flew over Los Angeles, and then turned around and came back in. The flight lasted for about 3.5 hours. The U-2 that I was in was a newer version. It's about 33% larger than my father's plane that he flew. The early U-2s that were created in the 50s had a ceiling of about 78,000 feet. Once it got to that altitude, it wouldn't perform well. The new U-2s can fly well above 75,000 into the 80,000 foot range. They can carry a bigger payload because they're larger. They can fly further. They can fly higher. They can fly longer. So as a platform for gaining intelligence information, it can circle around above an enemy location for hours on end, bringing back information in real time. Back in the 50s and the 60s, the U-2 film would be processed after landing, and it would take about 2 weeks to get the images. Now, you're getting them beamed to you by computers and satellites to an office desk at the CIA headquarters where you're reviewing the ground information below. But overall, the trip was fantastic, and I would love to do it again, but probably never will.
Let me ask one final question to bring some of this discussion to relevance for today's problems. A traditional issue for the United States in dealing with evil empires or evil regimes is whether to isolate the regime or whether to try to engage it and persuade it. Mr. Jaresko pointed out the Ukrainian famine in the early 30s. It was precisely at that time that Franklin Roosevelt decided to extend diplomatic recognition to the former Soviet Union. And that began some modicum of contacts between our two countries. And then, of course, those massively expanded in World War II with the Lend-Lease program, when we shipped a lot of equipment and a number of personnel over to construct facilities, and we shipped Ford trucks and other things there. And then later, under your father, there was the thaw and some further contacts. Then later, under Brezhnev, there was the détente period in the late 60s and early 70s. And then once again, things moved back a little bit. And then finally, under Gorbachev, there was an even wider opening. So for a half century, we had a policy of, the United States policy was trying to engage the Soviet Union by and large rather than isolate it from the outside world. In comparison, there are some countries, some regimes, such as North Korea and Cuba, for example, where the United States has sought to isolate the regime as a means of fostering some change in that regime to make it become a freer country. In the case of the former Soviet Union, if we had decided on isolation rather than engagement, how do you think history would have been different?
I think that it will be the nuclear war, because when you isolated the regime, you have to understand, first of all, that the Russian authoritarian rule, or Cuban, or North Korean, it's not came with this ideology. It was all the time there. So it is, when you are isolated, you are supporting this dictator there, because you are presenting the clear image of the enemy, of the evil empire, America, who want to kill us, destroy us. It is easy to explain. You see, they're not allowed to trade, they're not allowed anything. And of course, it is stopping any transformation inside the society, because it's consolidation against the enemy, making much easier to control the people. If we're talking about Soviet Union, we see that it is this showing and possibility to exchange and to see that that society more effective brought the Soviet Union to the transformation and not the pressure of the President Reagan and Star Wars, because it was not pressure from the outside. It was people don't want to live this. We're still living worse. We want these changes. I think if America left the blockade of Cuba, it will be no Castro there in 3 years. If it will be the flood of American tourists there, all these businesses started there, people told we don't want this. It belongs to 50s. So it is the biggest supporter of the Castro. It is the, by the way, the same in the North American regime. It's American administration policy now. I have no doubt on this. You have to open, because it is open society. United States have no fear that that regimes will intervene and change America and reverse American rules. So showing the good example is the best way just to say in better life. All the people want to live better.
Let's let our speakers each have a final word. Gary?
Thank you. If you'd like more information on our efforts to preserve Cold War history and honor Cold War veterans, please look us up online at coldwar.org. There will be a book signing following this discussion with Sergei selling his book. I do have a few limited numbers of some books, not that I've written, but that are about the U-2 incident and the U-2 program by Chris Pocock. These are autographed by the author, as well as Spy Trader. This is about the exchange of my father and Rudolf Abel in 1962, as well as other spy exchanges at the Glennecker Bridge in Potsdam, Germany during the Cold War era. I have a couple of a limited number of these for sale outside afterwards as well. I would like to thank the National Atomic Museum, the Atomic Testing Museum, excuse me, the Desert Research Institute, Art Wolf, his boss and superiors for their hosting of us. It's been a wonderful privilege to be here, to talk with you, to talk to Sergei, and let you know a little bit more about Cold War history. So thank you all very much for coming, and I look forward to talking to you afterwards.
Sergei, final word?
Yeah. I'm starting with thanking all these people and institutions that Gary mentioned, because with my half English, half Russian, it is difficult just to pronounce everything in the proper way. So he did it. What I will tell you, when I came here 12 years ago, I found all this similarity of our fears on the both sides. It was during the Cold War. I also was surprised how similar Americans and Russians, and how different America and Russia in their views. And so why I'm saying you read my book, because I try to explain there our vision of the Cold War and the similarity of our fears on the both sides, and how it was dangerous, our life, not because it was evil person in Kremlin or even person in the White House, but because we don't understand each other. We didn't understand each other at that time. We don't understand each other now. It will take a long time that between the two nations will understand each other. It is very important to know that it is people are similar, but mentality of the nation are very different. And with one of the things we're talking about, the democracy in Russia. It's no communism in Russia, but democracy in Russia will come. No, it's no democracy too there, and democracy will come there not earlier than in 50 years, and it will be still transition until everything can happen, because it has to be transformation of the nation. So thank you for coming, thank you for your question, and read my book.
Personally, I'm inspired by how Sergei has learned market principles here in the United States.
You know, it is the university publisher, and they're living in the socialism.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming out on a wonderful Saturday afternoon as this. Troy, did you want to make a final announcement?
No, I'm just delighted for this session and attendance, and I want to thank Sergei and Gary and you, Bill, very much.
All right. Thank you. That was good. That was good.
We'd like you all to come back in an hour or a little less to enjoy the Nevada premiere of
Thanks
The
for
Cold
helping.
War and Beyond, a film by Jim Tebow.